Hello. So I'm going to do a demo. I'll talk about the setup, how much it costs, all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to really talk too much about technique. That can come in some later videos. Okay, so this is a Studio Logic SL88. SL Studio. It is a 88 key, fully weighted FATAR keybed. Um, and it's just a keyboard controller. Doesn't have any sound generating capability whatsoever. It plugs into my PC, which is currently running Ableton Live, and is going through Native Instruments Contact, which is running the Grandeur. So this is a setup that I use for soundtrack music making, as opposed to music making for, I don't know, maybe there's like musical music making, which people listen when people listen to tunes on the radio or whenever they're listening to that sort of thing. This is more for making music for video games and soundtracks. So I guess there may be some people who would like to get a similar setup. And so the price for this whole setup, getting an operational setup, assuming that you had a PC, you're probably going to be paying like $2,000 if you included it, like 2,000 US if you just threw everything together. So I'll say this right now. So a lot of people might go, "Oh, this is too rich for my taste," and that's understandable. It's a lot of money, and I don't want to waste your time. So I'll just tell you, it's like some people are going to see the sticker shock. That's okay. And then the rest of this video, I'm going to be talking about what does that what would we try to be getting? What kind of features are we going to try and fit into this $2,000 budget? So let's talk about this SL88, which costs around $500, and it is a fully weighted keyboard. Oh, and that doesn't even include the darn stand. Okay, so it's a fully weighted 88 key keyboard. That means that it holds the full range of notes that you would have on a grand piano, everything from, okay, and that means, so what having all 88 keys means is you're going to need space. You're going to need space in your studio to house the thing. It is kind of heavy, so you're going to need a stand, an adequate keyboard stand for it, and that stand should be double bar, meaning if we look at we look down there are two bars to this thing, right? There's pointing with my foot. There's two bars, and that prevents this. That's very rigid. It means that if I push this thing forward and backwards, it doesn't wobble. You don't want your piano to wobble because sometimes you got to hit those keys pretty hard, and if it wobbles, your strength gets sapped. Like your strength, all of your force winds up going into just pushing the keys and the whole keyboard, and it starts wobbling, and it will fatigue. It will really fatigue your hands when you're playing. So a good stand, a good double bar structured stand, very important. This thing's also kind of heavy. You don't want something that's flaky. Don't spend $500 on a keyboard and then wimp out on a stand, and then your stand, breaks someday, and your $500 keyboard goes crashing onto the ground. So very important. Now, this is a weighted FITAR key bed, and what that means is if we talk about, let's say, normal, if there's any gamers out there and you're used to using a mechanical keyboard like a Cherry MX, maybe you've got some Cherry MX brown switches. Some people might actually really like the Cherry MX blue switches, the ones that have the clicky key switch. So Cherry MX is the manufacturer of those key switches in that keyboard. So any keyboard that uses Cherry MX switches is going to have the same feel and response, the impulse responses. So FITAR, FATAR, is the name of the manufacturer of the key beds that go into these pianos. These things have wooden key switches, like not just key switches, there's like a whole lever system in there, a hammer action that makes you feel like when you're pressing the keys on this keyboard, you feel the resistance of the levers inside the thing, and it gives you the physical illusion that you're driving mallets in the piano that are striking strings. It's pretty remarkable technology, and it means that if you're not going to get a Studio Logic SL88 keyboard, but you get a different one and it still has a FITAR weighted keybed, it'll feel the same. And it means that when you use, maybe it turns out later on down the road that this becomes, a real passion of yours, and it turns into an actual career, and you find yourself buying additional keyboards and synths. If they're using FITAR keybeds, that impulse response will be consistent across all of them. So as you become used to playing with the weighted keybed, there won't be much adjustment that you have to make between them. They'll all feel the same. Now, let's talk about what fully weighted means. So this one is fully weighted, but let me show you a not fully weighted keyboard, like that little Akai MBK Mini. Nothing wrong with that little thing, okay? It's a different tool. Don't think of that thing as somehow being inferior to this one. There's a reason that thing's still plugged in. There's a reason I still have that. That's because it's still useful. Just because you got a screwdriver that does a really good job at turning screws doesn't mean you throw away the hammer, okay? Because the hammer has another job, nailing nails into the wall, right? Like, so the purpose of the Studio Logic keyboard, or the purpose of a fully weighted keyboard, is to generate a physioacoustic illusion. And we'll talk about that. In fact, I'm going to explain that right now by talking about the normal non-weighted keyboard. Okay, so that little Akai MBK Mini, that thing is really a synth driver. It's good for driving, synthesizers, drum machines, and it's got 8 knobs, which all correspond to like the little 8 knobs that you have here. So it's a control surface as well for Ableton Live, and those 8 knobs will correspond to the 8 knobs that you get in any instrument group. So that is really, really that's the main good thing about that little Akai MBK Mini. It gives you a lot of stuff in a tight little package. And let's listen to the notes when I start playing that thing. I'm going to try doing that a little better. All right. So you might have noticed some of the velocities kind of hit a little hard and some were a little soft. And it's like, let's hear it on this one. It's much more consistent on this thing. All of these keys have been calibrated and adjusted so number one, they all feel the same. That one has like the MPK has like the springs are a little inconsistent. Some feel kind of soft, some feel really hard, and so they're not physically calibrated to all be the same. And I think the sensors themselves not exactly calibrated. You can play soft and hard notes. I'm gonna try and get a range of really really soft notes versus hard notes by adjusting how hard I strike the keys. So what I can say is it doesn't take a whole lot of force to get like a max hit. On this one though, so if you want to get a max hit out of that thing, you got to smack it pretty hard. And so it means that your dynamic range, it means on the little keyboard, your full range of soft to strong hits is spread over a very very small dynamic range of impacts of impact strengths, whereas on the SL8 on a fully weighted keyboard, that wide dynamic range is mapped to a wide dynamic range of keyboard impact intensities. So it means it's basically a lot easier to get the loudness of the hit that you're looking for. If all you care about is hitting the right note, the MPK Mini might do you well. It's not exactly a full-size keyboard, so that can be kind of tricky for you, especially if you're used to playing on full-sized piano keyboards. So I actually find I have a lot of difficulty on that thing. Plus, because it's a smaller keyboard, if you want to play high notes and low notes, they have a little button. They got a couple of buttons for octave shifts. This one, you don't ever have to hit that. So it means you don't have to sacrifice a hand to hit the octave shift buttons. And then I guess in your software, you can do things like keyboard splits. This thing, you never have to hit a keyboard split. You never have to do octave shifts. If you want to improvise and you don't want to be held back by having to shift octaves and do keyboard splits, this thing is great. Just because you can do it on an MPK Mini doesn't mean it's great. It's a workaround, right? This thing, you don't have to deal with the workarounds. So that's again part of what all that money. This is why we throw the money at the thing. That's how this thing justifies its expense. So, right. So the thing about the MPK Mini though is that it doesn't take a lot of hand strength to actuate a full hit. That's why that thing is really good for synths. If you want to, noodle around and go like that thing is really good for noodling. You can really noodle on an Akai MPK Mini very quickly. On a non-weighted keyboard, you can noodle very quickly. Fully weighted, you'll actually have to undergo a little bit of physical training. And by that, I just mean you're going to have to play your piano every day for a few hours, a few hours every day to work up the hand strength. And by playing it, I mean, you may have to do some drill exercises like just doing arpeggiations and going up and down and going up and down and gradually and the other thing is that on a small on like a non-weighted keyboard, you'll probably be actuating primarily with just finger strength. With this thing, you're going to be using wrist and arm strength, because if you just use finger strength, you're asking for like carpal tunnel. You're asking for an RSI. So what I mean by using wrist strength and hand strength is, right? You'll notice I'm not using my fingers to play. I'm using my wrist. I'm twisting my wrist. So you'll notice that what I'm doing is I'm tilting my hand in order to generate the necessary key impacts. Also, I think I have to turn off my low light compensation on my Logitech camera. Oh, it's already off. Okay, good. Yeah. So there's a lot of these physical differences. Okay, so let's talk about this physioacoustic illusion. So remember what I told you about pianos is that you're driving some levers inside a piano to actuate hammers that strike strings. But we have no actual hammers. We have no actual strings. We have no piano cabinet. There is no mechanics outside of what the only mechanicals that we have are whatever's inside the key bed. That's it. So when I say we're talking about a physioacoustic illusion, it means that when you press the key, you have the illusion that the energy that you're expending into your muscles to drive the keys is being converted into the requisite sound that comes out from an actual piano string being struck by a mallet that you have actuated with your muscles. That's why it's an illusion. It's not real, but it is convincing to the person who's playing the instrument. That would be you, the player. So I guess a good analogy for this would be if you take a wine glass, and you have like a teaspoon and you hit the wine glass with the teaspoon and the thing goes ping, right? And it feels about right. There's a certain amount of loudness and a certain kind of sound that you would come to expect from the experience of living in the real world as to how much ping is supposed to come out of that wine glass when you strike it with the spoon. If, on the other hand, when I'm using that Akai, the non-weighted keyboard, it's kind of like if I strike the glass with the spoon and the thing goes because it just senses a little too strong, and the requisite sound that I expect should be generated from the physical impact is like has no basis in reality, and it completely shatters. There is no illusion. There is no physioacoustic illusion. So when I play this thing, and if you want to be able to, it's not about just hitting the right keys. This thing is about hitting the keys right. You want to make it so that when you're playing the thing, the right sounds are coming out to you. And so when you're trying to improvise, you want to make it so that you may actually have a sound in mind. And so when you press on the keys a certain way, it's like you're putting in the exact muscle inputs to get the sound that you want out of your setup. So that's why the physioacoustic illusion is so important, and why a fully weighted key bed is a large part of that. It is a vital component of that. All right, so we talked about the keyboard. This keyboard plugs into the PC through a USB port, and it acts as it. This thing will become available as a number of MIDI. It shows up as a MIDI instrument. Now, when it comes to the actual sound, the other end of the sound, there are two things to consider. One of them is your headphones, because one of the advantages of working with a raw controller and something that has no sound generation, it has no speakers, and doesn't, it's not an actual piano, is you can live in a place which has neighbors and not disturb them. So wireless headphones. These are HyperX Clouds, and I believe I'm using. I have like a Tautronics, a little aptX low latency codec, Bluetooth transmitter. So whatever sound that the PC is generating goes through that little aptX low latency transmitter, goes to my headphones with the minimum amount of latency. If you have a lot of latency, it means when you strike the key, bong, 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 and there's like time delay that passes, so that breaks the illusion. It doesn't feel right. It makes it hard for you to get keynotes to hit on a certain rhythm, and hard to get things into the groove. You need low latency. You're going to need headphones. You either use wired ones, which will snag and get in your way, or you can get wireless ones. But if you get wireless ones, you better make sure that they've got either Bluetooth low latency, both on the receiving end and on the transmitting side. They have to be compatible. So Bluetooth, if it's Bluetooth, it has to be aptX low latency. And if you're using something else, and it's another wireless one, that's another way to get around it is find, whenever you're picking up a pair of headphones, you got to look very, very carefully at the latency specs of those headphones. This is vital. Then there's the sound card that you're using. So the PC has its own built-in sound card, motherboard sound card. I'm not using that thing because if I go into my options and my preferences and I go to audio and I set this thing to like MME DirectX and I use my built-in sound card, which is actually using my monitor, it's actually using my monitor output, my HDMI outputs, that thing has 279 milliseconds of it's got a quarter second. It has a quarter second of lag when I hit the thing, and it. So any of you who've played any FPS games and tried to pull off headshots with like a quarter second of lag between when you click the mouse button and the shot actually goes through, you're going to be like, that's unplayable, right? Kind of the same thing. You want to bring that latency down as far as you can. So, I can look at this thing. Let's see. I mean, I can try and I'll try and use my EIE as well. No, it's still 279 ms. It's still like just horrendous. I can try and turn down the input latency. It's still working. Let's bring it down. Let's bring it down even more. Okay, you hear that? That's what happens if your buffer's not high enough, and it's 11 milliseconds. So maybe we can turn that up. Whoops. Hang on a second here. Sorry about that. My sleeve actually caught on my mouse pad and yanked it out of the way. Okay, so our input output latency, it's 25 milliseconds. Let's see. Oh, it's still bad. Okay, maybe if I just bring it up on this end, it'll be better. Okay, so we got it down to 46 milliseconds plus whatever's on my headphones. So these are things you can do, right? You can still sounding okay. Now, mind you, the less you have. Ooh, okay, so it can't get it below. Actually, a way you can do it is you can turn on the test tone. Can you hear the click and the crackle? You can hear little pops. It's pretty good at 21. I don't hear anything bad. Oh, 15's bad. Okay, we can get it as low as 23.2. So that's pretty good on the EIE. If I use my... And so that is an outboard sound card. Let's try it using my... Let's try using my monitor output. Okay, 15.5. I got crackles. We can get it as low as 17.4. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Wasn't like this a few years ago. So, kind of interesting. It could be that maybe we can actually do without using ASIO devices. Let's turn this one on. And this one's fine. This one does it at 14.3 ms. So, some of it also matters in terms of how good your computer is as well. So, you might actually be able to get by without using an ASIO driver. I use something called ASIO for all. So you might actually be able to get away without having an external sound card. But if you do have problems, like the other thing about having an external sound card is that if you're going to be recording audio, you're going to get motherboard noise. So that might be the other major consideration. But latency is one consideration, and noise that comes off of the motherboard is another consideration. So you might be able to save like $200 if you're able to get it to work. So I say try it on your PC, dial things down. What you're trying to do is you're trying to avoid the crackles and you're trying to get that latency down as far as you possibly can. So in this case, I can get it down to like 14.3 ms. So yeah, actually, it seems that the built-in hardware is actually getting better and better. It's so huh, something to consider. Okay, so I'm using Ableton Live. I really like this whole getup here. Maybe the reason I like it is I like the interface. I like the way that's set up. I have also over there, that is a Launchpad Mini. It is an 8x8 grid of 64 buttons, and this 8x8 grid corresponds to the 8x8 grid of buttons here, or recording buttons. So if I press that button, you'll see that it now begins recording into that slot. And if we look at this slot, oh, I heard nothing. Oh, I heard nothing because this channel has no instrument on it. But if I drag it over here, it should play something. There's some notes here. Yeah, there we go. So yeah, it works. It means that yeah, I can be recording into any of my different instruments that I have set up, and I can just press a button and it will record into there. It's pretty good for if you're again doing improvisation. Whenever you do improvisation, you should be recording into a slot. Whenever you hear something really good, then you should tell it to start recording into another slot. So it, in a way, it's kind of like if you're a person who plays plenty of video games, and there's this wonderful thing that NVIDIA video cards have called shadow play. And shadow play is this kind of thing where it's like maybe you manage to pull off a really good kill streak in Call of Duty, and you manage to like get your UAV online and get an Apache strike on some guys, and you got like a giant 15 kill combo or something like that, and then you're like, well, let's record that into shadow play. Let's go into shadow play. And what shadow play does is shadow play is constantly recording onto like your SSD onto a certain directory, and it just saves the last 60 seconds or whatever, or last 3 minutes of gameplay footage, and so you can retrieve that later, right? So the philosophy with doing improvisational stuff is you should just constantly be recording. Don't try and record and then say, all right, now we're going to play everything perfectly, because what happens is you switch from the improvisational mindset into the contrived mindset, and that your brain works completely differently when you're trying to play things exactly as you have planned. You're no longer improvising anymore, and it'll never be as good when you're trying to force the music to come out a certain way. So my suggestion is work with something like this. This is more like a play around with the piano, not just play the piano. You're going to play around and experiment with the piano. You're going to improvise, constantly record everything, and just record into new slots whenever you get something that sounded good. That way it's easy to find whatever it was that you just caught. You don't have to sift through an hour's worth of MIDI recordings. And MIDI recordings take up very little space on the hard drive. So like a lot less than video does, believe me. So yeah, have that good setup. Then I can talk about let's talk about the actual this virtual instrument that I'm using right now. So I'll switch over to this display here. Okay, so Native Instruments makes a sampler. This is a sampler called Kontakt. And a sampler is the difference between, say, a synthesizer and a sampler is that a synthesizer generates the tones in a procedural manner. It calculates the tones in real time and generates the waveform in real time, and it uses a bunch of math to like blast this stuff at you. Now, a sampler is different in that it relies on pre-recorded samples. So this thing they've gone and they went and they recorded an actual grand piano, and they got all those samples into here, and they've set up something that sounds pretty good. They've given you an accurate reproduction of a fairly, acoustically accurate reproduction of a grand piano, or recording, I should say. And then they've presented it to us in this nice little format. And so there are some settings that I've got wired up on this thing when I did the demo at the beginning. So there are, on this SL88, there are 3 joysticks. The first joystick is here. Whoops, let's get the joysticks to show up. This first joystick is a fully self-centering spring-loaded joystick. So both axes, no matter which way you push it, it'll always recenter itself. This other joystick, on the other hand, has a horizontal sprung axis, but the vertical axis always stays where you pushed it. So it maintains its position, but the horizontal axis is spring-loaded. And the final joystick it's not broken. There's just no springs in it, and it just maintains whatever position that you push it in. And it has, again, 2 axes of control. So what I've done is I've mapped this one, the vertical axis, into pitch bend. And then this one, if we look over here in the anatomy tab, let's get back to the, here we go. In fact, let me bring up my, here, I'm going to grab the camera from, 1 second. Okay, great. So what I've done is, if we look in here, there's a tuning thing. So you can detune the piano. Like, I've got this vertical axis here just set to slightly detune the notes. You're trying to go for like an eerie kind of like off sound. You can detune the piano with this little thing right here. So that's pretty cool. Then the other thing I have is this other joystick. As I move it left and right, if we look carefully, you can see that the tonal knob here, the horizontal axis, adjusts the tone of the piano. So if I start playing the thing on hard notes, that kind of muffles the strokes. Then there's the vertical axis, and the vertical axis adjusts the pedal resonances. So this thing also came with a nice little foot pedal over here. I'm trying to kick it into view. It came with a nice little foot pedal. A sustain pedal is what it's called. So normally if you hit keys, now if I press on the foot pedal, the notes sustain. And what's more about this, if I release it, it stops. So what's more about the sustain pedal is that there's resonance occurring. When you strike one note, that string vibrates, and all the other strings which are of the same note or similar frequency, they will resonate as well. So the sound kind of becomes very, kind of rounded out. Like, listen to the difference. I can hold on it. Now let's do it with sustain. So we can crossfade this effect. Just to be able to know the difference between having the resonance and not having the resonance. So I can tune how much resonance I want, as well as how soft or how hard I want the string hits to be. So kind of nice being able to have that kind of those sorts of controls. Now there's some additional stuff, and these ones are not hooked up to any particular switches, but there are damper, pedal, and string noises. I'm just going to crank all of these to the maximum. This is when I step on the pedal. Okay, so when you step on the pedal on a real piano, there are these dampers. These are these I don't know. For all I know, they're sticks with socks wrapped around them, and they sit on top of the strings and they damp the sound of the string. They muffle it. So when you press on the key, the damper lifts up off the string to allow it to vibrate. Then the mallet bangs the string, and the string goes. And when you release when you release your finger off of the key, the damper comes back down and snuffs out the string. When you use the sustain pedal, it lifts all of the dampers off of all of the strings. So when I step on this thing, you can basically hear all the strings going ring as the dampers are lifted off. Okay, now it's not normally that loud on a real piano, which is why I tune those things down. So that's the string sound. So that ring is the sound of the string. So I just want it to be, barely audible. Actually, what I could do is I can turn off all the other stuff. There. I can just barely hear it. And sometimes my noise gate's not even letting that sound through. The idea is to just have enough so that it's there. Then there's the pedal. So this thing's going thump-a-thump. Pretty good. Then there's the damper. Right. Then there's the hammer sounds. You can hear this kind of a you can just kind of hear it's still a little loud, so I kind of like to have it down a bit. Yeah, it's still just a little too loud. Let's turn that down. That's better. Then there's another little setting here called Silent Key, which I have on. And what this does is if I push really, 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 really slowly and carefully on this thing, it won't actually play the note, which is like it is with a real piano. Because if you don't strike a note hard enough, the hammer or the mallet won't bang the key. It'll miss the key entirely. So, or it'll miss the string entirely. So that's what I'm doing is I'm making this emulate a real piano even more by allowing for silent key. So what that silent key can do is if I take my foot off of the foot pedal, so what it does is if you're holding down the other keys of the same note and you've got silent key, so you can press those keys really softly just to lift the dampers off of them. And when you start striking the low notes, the higher notes start resonating. So it's like it's a goofy little trick you can do. So that's why I have silent key on. It's like, then you can actually press a bunch of notes just to lift the dampers off of those ones. Actually, wait. Yeah, I can hear the other notes starting to resonate. So it's a goofy little trick. It means that you can hold down a bunch of notes and then press that one. If you only want those ones to resonate, you can do that. Honestly, I don't know if anyone would notice it, but I think it's kind of cool. The other thing that it does is it makes it closer to a real piano. And part of the reason I'd want to do that is so that someday when I become really good at playing this thing, maybe someday there'll come a time where I'm in front of a real piano and I want to play the real piano. So I want to just kind of ingrain that training into me. So that's the main reason I would want to put on silent key. Yeah, so I guess that's pretty much it. That's pretty much everything. And I'll see you guys next time.